Now we're going to take a look at some tools that we can use to actually kind of paint inside of Illustrator. In my Tools panel here on the left-hand side, you're going to see what looks like a paintbrush. And again, the paintbrush has an arrow in the bottom right, so if I click and hold for a second, I can see Paintbrush and Blob Brush tool. If I click on the Paintbrush tool, it will allow me to paint. Now currently, I don't have any color applied to either my fill or my stroke. So I'm going to go to the color panel and I'm just going to sample a color real quick. So this way, when I paint, you can now see that I'm painting with that particular color. It didn't apply it to the fill, however. Notice the fill object here has a slash through it, which means there's no color being applied. Instead, it applied it to a stroke. That means that when you're working with the painting tools, you're actually creating what's known as a path. So this path can eventually be modified. So if I click on the direct selection tool, for example, here, and I click on that path, notice I have handles, and I can manipulate and move those handles, and I have anchor points, and I can grab those anchor points and move it. So it created the anchor points automatically, and it added those handles to those anchor points so I can manipulate the path. So some tools inside of Illustrator automatically convert whatever you're drawing to what's known as a path. We'll talk more about the Bezier curves in a later lesson, but just understand that these painting tools give you the option to work with the path, not the fill. I'm going to select all and delete. Another tool that's really useful is called the Shape Builder tool. I'm going to click on my shapes here and I'm going to choose to create an elliptical shape. I'm going to draw a perfect circle and then I'm going to make a copy of that perfect circle. To make a copy of the perfect circle, I'm going to grab the selection tool and I'm going to click and drag while holding the Alt key. This will allow me to make a copy. Now if I hold the Shift key while I'm dragging, it will let me move that shape horizontally matched up with the previous shape. Now I do have a stroke around these shapes. It's the green color that I've added earlier. I'm eventually going to add a fill color here in a moment. Now that I've got these two, I'm going to select both of them. To select more than one shape, I can either shift click on the shape that's not selected, or I can draw a marquee around them. A marquee is using the selection tool to draw a rectangle. When you use the selection tool to draw a rectangle, you're creating a little dotted line around the shapes, and when you let go, those shapes are selected. So now I'm going to Alt click and drag and get my double point and my double triangles and pull that down while holding Shift to make them perfectly aligned. So now these shapes are perfectly aligned, and I'm going to show you how we can use the Shape Builder to convert these into different shapes. So the beautiful thing, as I mentioned in previous lessons, is that Illustrator lets a person like me who cannot draw, lets me learn how to draw. So I'm going to select these shapes. I'm going to fill in the fill color with whatever color I want. Make sure the fill is there, and in this case I'll make it maybe a light blue. There we go. So I have a green fill with a light blue, green stroke with a light blue fill. Now that these shapes are selected, I'm going to go to my Tools panel and I'm going to click on the Shape Builder tool. The Shape Builder tool looks like it's got a small circle that's expanding into a larger circle. So it looks like two concentric circles that are stuck together. And that's what it's going to do. It's going to let me take these shapes and combine them together. So you can see as I hover over these shapes, I can add them together to create a new shape. So I can click and drag, and as I drag over these shapes, I will create a new shape. Instantly, I get a four-leaf clover. Pretty wonderful, pretty powerful, very nice. Now I'm going to rotate this shape, and I'll do it 90 degrees. And then I'm going to move it over here. Next, I'm going to grab the rectangle tool, and I'm going to draw a stem for that flower. And then I'm going to draw rectangles to create the pot that this flower is going to go into. Okay, so by using the Shape Builder tool, I was able to take four circles and combine them into one to create a four-leaf clover kind of shape. Now I'm going to add to that shape another circle in the center, and I'm going to remove it. So I'm going to create a circle here because we need to have the bud. We need to kind of have the stem where that flower is. So I'm going to go here in the center. Actually, I'll do it over here on the side. I'll draw a perfect circle. It's going to be smaller than the others. I'm going to move it into the center of that shape. And I can tell when I've intersected because it will tell me with the smart guides that I've intersected. Move it again. There's the intersection. I'm going to select these shapes, shift clicking on the outer circle. Now that they're selected, I'm going to grab the shape builder tool again. But this time, instead of the plus sign to add together, I'm going to do the minus. I'm going to use a modifier key on my keyboard to cause it to subtract from that shape. To do this, pressing the Alt key will give me the minus. Now if I click the Alt key here, you're going to get a hole in that shape. So now I've created a flower with a bud in the center. Now it is not centered to this guy. I'm going to move this until it's centered there. Now it's intersected and centered there, and this one I'll make it centered as well. There we go, perfect centered. Okay, now I want all of these shapes to be one large shape. So I'm going to grab my shape builder tool again. Oops, I need to make sure I have the object selected first. Select all three objects. Shape builder tool. And I'm going to just draw a line through all of those shapes that you see. And now they'll become one big shape. So I have one giant shape out of all those other shapes. Okay, so one more thing I'd like to do is I am going to take the bottom of this pot and I'm going to angle it so it looks more like a flower pot does. And then I'm going to put a stripe through where the top of the pot might be separate from the bottom, because you know how the ceramic pots have that little rim around it. So we'll create that. There's a tool called the scale tool. The scale tool will allow me to change the scale of this bottom two anchor points. So I'm going to grab this direct selection tool and select just the two bottom anchor points. Grab the scale tool and I'm going to move them in towards the center. You can see there's a registration mark here. It's very hard. I'm going to zoom in. There's the registration mark. And what this will allow me to do is when I click on this anchor point and I drag it inward, they come in together. So this is perfectly symmetrical. And if I zoom out, you can now see that it looks more like a flower pot should look. So I'm starting to get this nice feel for this shape. I'm going to draw one last rectangle to create the separation between the top portion of the pot and the rest of it. I'm going to create a rectangle here. We're going to use the shape builder again to subtract that information. So I'm going to hit the Alt key and subtract. Oops, I only had that shape selected, of course. Let me select all of those shapes again. There we go. Now I can subtract using the shape builder. Now I'm going to have three separate shapes I need to do because it does intersect with the line here. So I'm going to Alt click here, Alt click here, and then Alt click here. That'll get rid of that line. One last shape that I'm going to create is going to be for the leaves of this flower, for example. So I'm going to grab the ellipse tool and I'm going to draw an ellipse that looks like a leaf. And I'm going to rotate that and place that into the design here. And I'm going to resize it just a little bit. There we go. And then I'm going to create another one, a copy. And we're going to reshape it and resize it onto the other side. Just so I have two leaves that look a little different from each other. And this one should be a little higher up because it's younger, it's smaller. And there we go. Now I can select all those shapes and add them together by using the shape builder tool again and paint on all of these shapes and combine them into one. And there we are. Now they are all one shape that is partly together and they're merged into one shape. So using the paintbrush tool, I create paths. It allows me to paint whatever I want using my mouse. But the shape builder allows me to take basic shapes and quickly convert them into something that makes sense, like in this case, a flower in a flower pot.